Well, when I heard that this was Jazz Appreciation Month, it didn't take me but a split second to think we got to have a jazz service. So today is our day, and we're going to have a little special type of sermon. It's going to be interspersed with some music videos, some of my favorite jazz pieces, just some excerpts of them. And we're going to talk about jazz from the perspective of Brother Wynton Marsalis. My first experience or mystical experience with Wynton Marsalis was in 1991 when I was in Osan, South Korea. I was there on business, and about a block from my hotel was a jazz club called All That Jazz. I went in there, and as I sat there enjoying the ambiance, the DJ played the jazz standard Here and Now from Marsalis' Standard Time Volume 3. And as I sat there, I was just blown away listening to his sound. He was a big time performer by then, but I had just really kind of got into Marsalis, and at that moment realized just how special a player he was. And on the spot, I stopped listening to smooth jazz and went to the real thing. Well, in recent years, we've had the distinct pleasure of spending a week with Wynton Marsalis, Cecile McLaurin-Salvant, who you're also here today, and the great actor Wendell Pierce, who narrated a special piece for Marsalis at Chautauqua. When I thought about preaching on jazz, I realized I'd be better off, and you'd be better off, if I called on a jazz giant rather than trying to reinvent the wheel myself. So today I'm going to present to you about one half of Marsalis' 2009 lecture that Doug read an excerpt from. And I think this will really get the point across of how great this music is. He starts by saying that I'm starting with the words of Gerry Mulligan, who when asked, what does it take to play a great solo, said, I don't know what it takes to play one, but I can tell you how not to play one. Start off thinking, I'm about to play one. Before we sang, we spoke. Before we danced, we walked. Before we wrote, we told stories. Before we told stories, we lived. Those songs, dances, and writings allow us to speak to one another across generations. They gave us an understanding of our commonality long before the DNA told us we are all part of one glorious procession. At any point on the timeline of human history, there are tales to be told of love and loss, glory and shame, profundity, and even profound stupidity. Tales that deserve retelling, embellishing, and if need be, inventing from whole cloth. This is our story. This is our song. If well sung, it tells us who we are and where we belong. On these people of all kinds were people from everywhere. Some lived in cities, some on farms, educated, ignorant, religious, sacrilegious, enslaved and not. But even the unenslaved were oppressed, and they all wanted to be free. The frontier represented freedom. They sang songs and told stories, and what was in those stories was their exploits, their humor, and their aspirations. Some people sang and spoke with such depth that just listening and watching took you to the frontier of your own soul, picked you up, made you more alive. Hear a piece that does just that now. Well, that solo by Paul Desmond has got to be the most famous jazz solo of all time. He overshadows his partner there, Dave Brubeck. But this liberty was not free. Patrick Henry said, "Give me liberty or give me death. Death in the pursuit of liberty." Suddenly, all types of people appeared together. Geniuses, a thing never seen again. Virginian Tom Jefferson, high-minded New Yorker Alexander Hamilton, Bostonian turned Philadelphian Ben Franklin, in the twilight of his brilliance, the living embodiment of down-home sophistication. Men arguing with epic intensity over money and trade and the rights of states, money and taxes and political power, and money and slavery and religion, and just about everything you knew or had heard of. Well, there was a lot of knowledge in that group and a lot of memory and all that comes with knowledge and memory. Pride, arrogance, stubbornness. But don't let those wigs fool you. No, these men possess the timeless wisdom and a willingness to act together. You see, somewhere along the way, they realized that their freedom was linked to other people's freedom. The Bill of Rights taught us how to negotiate our differences the same way a good dance band adjusts to find the right tempo for each different room of dancers. To be effective, our founding fathers had to create a living document that could find the right tempo across the ages. And when the ink dried on the last signature, it was the Constitution that told us how to be. But it was left to the American arts to tell you who to be. And the who always affects the how. That's why this Constitution could be amended. Oh yes, this freedom had to find a political frame, but it needed a cultural engine. This new American way needed a homegrown art to make us into one people and to teach us who we are. Still revolutionary. The freedom to choose the life of your dreaming, to put yourself in the situation you wanted to be in or should be in. Man, this liberty was some serious stuff, because once you turn freedom loose, there's just no telling where it might go. It showed up suddenly in Minton's Playhouse in the 1940s. In 1940s Harlem, geniuses all together, a thing never seen again. Charlie Yardbird Parker from Kansas City, the living embodiment of down-home sophistication. John Coltrane, he wasn't there. John Dizzy Gillespie from Cheraw, South Carolina, full of rhythmic fire and intellectual curiosity. Thelonious Monk from Rocky Mount, North Carolina, mathematician of music and master of thematic improvisation. Right there were all kinds of knowledge and memory. These men were furiously discussing American fundamentals through a musical style called bebop. Somewhere along the way, they answered questions about individual freedoms and collective responsibilities in the language of swing. When all was said and done, they did nothing less than create a new school of American virtuosity. It rose from the bowels of our caste system to demonstrate with sheer brilliance that who a person is always more definitive than what a person is. Check out this piece.
Todo aquel que piense que la vida es desigual tiene que saber que no es así.
Those horns really make it sound good and make you want to move. What's the value of an artistic heritage? Who calculates the value of Amazing Grace, Yankee Doodle, or Go Down Moses? Those spirituals were the first body of identifiable, purely American musical art. All kinds of people from all over made one through tragedy. People playing drums in Congo Square in New Orleans, and all kinds of people danced to this music because those drums reminded people of who they were. Bostonian Ralph Waldo Emerson told you about the power of individuality. New Yorker Thelonious Monk told you a genius is he who is most himself. And Harriet Beecher Stowe wrote Uncle Tom's Cabin. That book told people slaves were people too. No matter how much it was mocked, it wasn't funny. And that book made people aware. But oh, those stubborn spirituals. Those spirituals told you every person was one person way before the DNA told you that. I'm telling you, those songs brought people together because singing gives a community purpose. And they put everything in those songs, and that music made us believe. And the music called us home. And Mahalia Jackson sang spirituals and songs that sounded like the heavens. And those songs were all you knew, all you needed to know, and all that you would ever need to know. And Martin Luther King was in jail in Birmingham, living Henry David Thoreau's treatise on civil disobedience under a government which imprisons any unjustly. The true place for a just man is also in prison. Dr. King was using the Constitution and the powerful American art of negotiation to pursue freedom, while Louis Armstrong told President Eisenhower and the nation, they've been breaking the Constitution I meant for years. Dr. King and Louis Armstrong were not alone. Americans of all stripes joined the struggle, and the people at last became free. Ask Cornelis Bix Beiderbecke, lyric hero of the jazz age, why his bourgeois Iowa family disowned him for playing jazz. But people still sang, danced, wrote, and nurtured our hearts, though it was underappreciated and thought to reek of snobbery and upper-class airs. But this art in all its forms speaks across time and calls us home. By 1890, some proud musicians were marching in the streets of New Orleans, inventing a new form of American music. It brought together marches and minstrelsy-like opera, ragtime and society dances, and Catholics and the sanctified church, and spirituals too. It set all of them down in the same room with Mardi Gras revelry to hear that same sermon again about freedom. And one person in balance with every person, except right now, they weren't talking, they were playing. And many called it the devil's music. And jazz and the blues were reviled by the Black church and eschewed by the education system. The American and I would add, audience has always been in a type of limbo, squeezed between three unsatisfied masters: the critical expert, validated by European tastes, the church, that would be us, and the court of fickle public opinion. Ask all the Negro preachers who railed against the blues for generations while the blues was coming out of every decent singer in their choir. Ask them and all those who wanted to save souls, what were the benefits of denying what came from our very souls in search of our true selves? If an artist sings deeply enough, they take you to the frontiers of your soul. And that frontier is freedom to feel the sensual nature of the is and the isness of things. This is what I feel, and you know you feel it too. And all over the country, people argue about life and love and loss, and God and freedom, and who we are and who we want our kids to be. Take a listen and look at this.
Nothing like you has ever been seen before. Nothing like you existed in days of yore. Never were lips so kissable, never were eyes so bright. I can't believe it's possible that you bring me such delight. Nothing can match the rapture of your embrace. Nothing can catch the magic that's in your face. You're like a dream come true, something completely new. Nothing like you has ever been seen before. Nothing like you has ever been mine before. Kisses I've known, but none so divine before. No one has your magnificence. Who can describe your charms? I'd like to make my residence forever in your arms. I never knew how wonderful life could be. No one but you could ever do this to me.
Cecile McLaurin-Salvant, Grammy Award winning for Best Album in Jazz of the Year. Well, W.C. Handy was the father of the blues. His father was a minister, and young Handy, he grew up with a religious tension that went all the way back to Adam and Eve. Hawthorne talked all about all this stuff in the Scarlet Letter, and you knew it was the priest all along. Ask the famous German string quartet who came to the White House to enlighten President John Tyler in 1841. After a couple of movements, the president reportedly chased them out with his cane. They heard him shout behind them, "Don't you know any Virginia reels?" Well, folks mistakenly thought it had something to do with being real. What's real is the fact that our country has always been enriched, and catch this, and expanded when folks who don't understand one another or who just don't plain like one another figure out how to come together or are forced together. And what art came from this glorious tension of slavery and freedom in Europe and Africa, in the New World and the Old World and the old world? Those American slaves could care less about European tastes. They were working with basics, and what they knew had to be adapted to this new situation. So they transformed everything they touched through improvisation. And because their situation required so much humor to survive, they syncopated, as we did this morning. Here comes one of the deepest American truths: the minstrel show. Random Black folks on the plantation imitating the ways of white folks are imitated by itinerant white entertainers who blacken and darken up and create plantation skits. Plantation owners then call through their slaves for the most talented, who then imitate the white entertainers as imitation of Black folks imitating white folks. These selected Blacks are then imitated by professional white performers. And after the Civil War and the rise of Black minstrelsy as an enterprise, white professionals were imitated by Black professionals. That can spin your head around. And Duke Ellington is in DC and he hears Jelly Roll Morton, King Oliver, and the original Dixieland Jazz Band. All of them down in New Orleans playing scalding hot jazz coming north to Chicago and New York. He hired some New Orleans musicians to combine high society with the deep down and dirty. And no one remembers the jazz age because now it's the swing era. And everybody is broke, and what they danced and sang was all they knew. It was all they needed to know, and it was all they would ever need to know. And after the war, people are running away to the suburbs and running so hard they are forgetting all kinds of stuff about who we are. And the people in the cities get lost too. People were trying to bring America's arts to the schools. Thank you, all the school teachers here. And here is Duke Ellington in Ohio State University. His tenor sax man, Big Al Ceas, befriends a student named Al Freed, and they keep in touch. Freed goes into radio and has a show in Cleveland called, what? The Moondog Show. Big Al writes a song called Castle Rock. Big Al goes on Freed's show, and Freed plays this song 7 times and starts calling these blues shuffles rock and roll. It wasn't nothing but what Basie and Louis Jordan played and Fats Domino down in New Orleans. Pretty soon, Freed started producing rock and roll shows with integrated bands. Of course, he had Big Al in one of those bands. American Bandstand approaches Freed with a television spot and said, "We want you on TV, but you got to lose those colored boys." Freed said, "Wait a minute, Big Al has been with me since I was in college. I can't fire these men." So they said, too bad. They hired Dick Clark and did away with the band altogether to avoid unpleasantry. That's marketing. Anyway, Black folks had Soul Train on TV and funk was the rage. And no one remembered that rock and roll was a merger of gospel country and the blues played by musicians influenced by jazz. No one remembered Al Freed or Big Al Ceas. No one remembered that Louis Armstrong had played with Jimmy Rogers on Blue Yodel #9 and then country R&B and pop charts. These charts had all the same #1 song in 1955. Carl Perkins, Blue Suede Shoes. No one remembers that a 2-beat groove is the same in all forms of American music. So is the blues. They only remembered slavery and segregation, and they put Chuck Berry in jail for the wrong kind of integrating. And rock took on a distinctively different phase, only to have musicians from Britain come here in the 1960s to reintroduce us to our own pre-segregated rock and roll. It was called the British Invasion. Here's our last piece by Grover Washington Jr. This was the first jazz song I got into when I was in the 7th grade, Mr. Magic. Well, my friends thought I was just a real nerd for listening to that song and that album over and over and over. They come over, I throw it on, and they couldn't understand, why did I listen to this stuff? Well, as we heard from Doug earlier when he read that piece very eloquently, jazz teaches how to balance your individuality with the desires of the group. It told you we have a history of tradition that requires skill and study, but demands you apply those skills to search the frontiers of your soul. It taught you that innovation and creativity hold hands with the tried and true. Marcellus says, "I've traveled across this unpredictable and unruly land. After almost every performance, people wait. They wait. They all want to know the same thing. Are we together, and is everything gonna be all right? The same question we have today. And I realize that we all yearn for a new American mythology. We want to embrace one another, but really we don't know how. It goes past slogans and talking. The answer is not more education, but more substantive and more culturally rooted education. Amen to Catherine, to Jane, to Katia, and all those who are teaching more culturally rooted education. And you can't get past the truth of yourself. It's always there because it was there and it is there. And when you acknowledge that truth, you understand it's not something you have to hide, but something to proudly show, because where you come from ain't where you're going. But if you don't know where you've been, you might just end up back where you started or further back. And as we forward our agendas for all the different things we're interested in doing, just remember there's only one cause, the American cause. And for us this morning, the Unitarian Universalist cause. That agenda is larger than our individual agendas. We need to look at our hand and find the key we've been searching for. It's what the Constitution started, Congo Square ratified, the Civil War sealed, the repeal of Reconstruction tested, Ellis Island co-signed, the Depression matured, 2 world wars proved, the Civil Rights Movement affirmed, Vietnam, Iraq, and now Afghanistan, which will end on September 11th, sobered. And now is the time to realize this is our story. If we sing it well, it tells us who we are and where we belong. And what is in those songs and the way we sing them is all you need to know. It's all you need to ever know. And it's all you will need forever. Amen. And may it be so.